Imagine for a moment that the reason biblical miracles feel confusing, is exaggerated, or even unbelievable today is not because modern people have become too logical, but because the stories themselves were never meant to be rushed, simplified, or flattened into literal claims. Imagine that these stories were originally told in a world where meaning unfolded slowly, where listeners gathered at night, where memory mattered more than speed, and where wisdom was carried not through explanation, but through reflection. In such a world, stories were not arguments to be won, but companions meant to be revisited again and again, each time revealing something slightly different depending on the listener's stage of life. Ancient people did not hear miracle stories the way we hear them now. They did not sit with arms crossed, silently deciding whether they were believable or not. They listened the way one listens to a riddle, a proverb, or a dream. Expected layers. They expected symbolism. They expected to think. The idea that belief required suspending reason would have felt strange to them because reason itself was considered part of wisdom. To understand the world was not seen as opposing the sacred, but as participating in it. When stories were first told, they were carried by voices, not pages. They were shaped by rhythm, repetition, and imagery, designed to settle into the mind slowly, much like a melody that lingers after the sound has faded. This is why ancient miracle stories feel strange when forced into modern categories. They were never meant to function as scientific reports or historical proofs. They were meant to guide attention, shape behavior, and quietly teach people how to live within reality rather than escape from it. Consider the story of the sea that parted, often told today as a dramatic display of impossible power. In the ancient world, listeners did not imagine towering walls of water frozen in place like scenery from a painting. They imagined a dangerous stretch of wetland, a place where land and water constantly shifted, where timing mattered, and where those who understood the environment survived, while those who did not were swallowed by it. The miracle, as they understood it, was not that nature broke its rules, but that awareness aligned with opportunity. One group moved carefully, attentive to the land beneath their feet, while the other followed blindly, driven by force rather than understanding. When conditions changed, the land behaved exactly as it always had. The story lingered not because it was unbelievable, but because it was painfully familiar. The same quiet logic appears in the story of the sun standing still. Ancient listeners did not picture the cosmos freezing in place, or did they imagine the universe bending itself for human convenience. They understood time differently. Time was measured through light, through warmth, through the feeling of a moment stretching longer than expected. To say the sun stood still was to say that circumstances unfolded in an unusually favorable way, that an opportunity did not end when it should have, that there was just enough light left to finish what needed to be done. This kind of language was not meant to describe astronomy, but experience. It described those rare moments when life seems to pause just long enough for meaning to settle in. Stories like these were not told to impress. They were told to be remembered. They stayed alive because people recognized themselves in them. They recognized their own mistakes, their own moments of insight, their own failures to pay attention. Over time, however, the rhythm of listening changed. Stories that once invited reflection became statements demanding agreement. Metaphor slowly hardened into literal claim, and curiosity was replaced with certainty. What once encouraged thinking began to discourage it. The story of the talking donkey offers another example of how ancient listeners understood symbolism instinctively. They did not imagine animals suddenly gaining human speech. They understood that animals, in storytelling, often represented instinct, awareness, and unfiltered perception. The donkey sees danger before the man does. It stops repeatedly, trying to prevent disaster, while the man, confident in his direction, grows frustrated and violent. The donkey's voice is not speech, but interruption. It is the moment when reality forces itself into awareness after being ignored for too long. The story was meant to humble, not amuse. It reminded listeners that wisdom does not always come from places we expect, and that certainty can easily blind us to what is obvious. Stories of endless food were heard the same way. Ancient communities lived with scarcity as a constant companion. They knew the fear of hunger, but they also knew something equally important, that hoarding destroys communities, while sharing preserves them. When listeners heard of bread multiplying or oil never running out, they did not imagine matter being created from nothing. They imagined fear loosening its grip. They imagined someone sharing first, others following, resources being redistributed, and waste disappearing. The miracle was not magic, but cooperation. It was a reminder that abundance often appears when people stop guarding what little they have. Even the quieter miracles, like iron floating on water, carried weight. Iron was essential, valuable, and difficult to replace. Losing it could mean the loss of livelihood. When the story describes iron rising, ancient listeners heard restoration rather than physics. They heard that loss was noticed, that responsibility was shared, and that what seemed gone could be recovered through attention and care. These stories were not about objects behaving strangely. They were about communities responding wisely to crisis. Resurrection stories were never meant to shock ancient audiences with images of bodies leaving graves. Death, in ancient language, described more than the end of life. It described exile, exclusion, and erasure. To be buried was to be forgotten. To rise was to be restored. When listeners heard of people returning from tombs, they heard about dignity returning where it had been stripped away. They heard about communities reclaiming those who had been abandoned. Resurrection was not proof of power, it was a language of hope. Healing miracles followed the same pattern. Blindness represented disorientation and social invisibility. Paralysis represented powerlessness. Possession described inner chaos, trauma, and loss of control. Healing meant reintegration, recognition, and the restoration of agency. Ancient listeners understood that presence, authority, and compassion could transform a life. They did not separate the physical from the social or the psychological. Healing was holistic, and so were the stories that described it. Miracles were never meant to convince skeptics. Ancient people already believed the world was filled with meaning. Miracles were teaching tools designed to guide attention rather than demand belief. When they were later treated as proofs, they lost their purpose. Proof ends reflection. Wisdom begins it. This is why many people today feel tension when listening to these stories. Not because they lack faith, but because they sense that something deeper has been replaced with something rigid. Have you ever read an ancient story, maybe a myth or a sacred text, and thought, did that really happen? Did a sea literally part? Did a man really turn water into wine? It's a natural question, and for centuries, we've been taught to view these stories through a very literal lens. But what if we've been missing the point? What if the true power of these ancient tales isn't in their historical accuracy, but in their profound symbolic meaning? Let's take the classic story of parting the Red Sea. Imagine you're standing on the shore, trapped between a relentless army and an impassable ocean. In a literal sense, this is a story of a physical miracle, a divine intervention that saves a group of people from certain doom. It's a powerful image for sure. But if we stop there, we're only scratching the surface. Now let's look at it symbolically. The sea can represent any overwhelming obstacle in our own lives. It could be a daunting career change, a difficult relationship, or a personal struggle that feels impossible to overcome. The pursuing army could be our past mistakes, our fears, our self-doubt, all the things that chase us and keep us from moving forward. In this light, parting the sea isn't about a supernatural event. It's about finding the courage and faith to face our challenges head-on. It's about that moment when we find a path forward where there seemed to be none. Suddenly, this isn't just an old story about someone else. It's our story. It's a roadmap for navigating the most difficult moments in our own lives. The miracle isn't the water splitting. The miracle is the transformation within us that allows us to find a way through. Think about the story of turning water into wine. On the surface, it's a tale of alchemy, a demonstration of supernatural power at a wedding celebration. It's impressive, a great party trick. But again, what's the deeper meaning? Water is essential, basic, plain. It represents the ordinary, the mundane aspects of our daily existence. Wine, on the other hand, represents joy, celebration, spirit, and transformation. It's the elevated experience. So the act of turning water into wine can be seen as a metaphor for finding the sacred in the ordinary. It's about taking the simple, everyday moments of our lives and infusing them with meaning, joy, and a sense of celebration. It's about transforming our own consciousness from a state of mere survival to one of vibrant, joyful living. It's not about waiting for a miracle to happen to us, but about realizing we have the power to create our own wine. By changing our perspective and appreciating the richness of life that's already here, this symbolic approach isn't about discrediting ancient wisdom. In fact, it's the opposite. It's about unlocking its true, timeless power. We get stuck on the literal, we create a barrier. We say, well, I've never seen a sea part, so this story isn't for me. We create a separation between then and now, between them and us. But when we see the symbols, these stories become universal and eternally relevant. They speak directly to the human condition, to the struggles and triumphs we all face, regardless of the era we live in. Consider the archetype of the hero's journey, found in myths from all over the world. A hero receives a call to adventure, denies it, meets a mentor, crosses a threshold into an unknown world, faces trials, and eventually returns home, transformed. Did every culture just happen to invent the same plot? Or is this story a symbolic map of our own psychological and spiritual development? The call to adventure is that moment we feel a pull towards something more in life. The mentor can be a teacher, a book, or an experience that gives us guidance. The trials are the challenges that force us to grow. The return home is about integrating our newfound wisdom into our everyday lives. This isn't just a story, it's the blueprint for personal growth. It lives within each of us. When we approach these texts as symbolic guides rather than literal history books, they become living documents. They become mirrors reflecting our own inner worlds. The conflicts between gods and monsters can represent our own internal battles between our higher aspirations and our base instincts. The quests for holy grails, or hidden treasures, can symbolize our search for truth, meaning, and self-realization. These aren't just fables. They are psychological and spiritual technologies passed down through generations. They are designed to awaken something within us, to guide us on our own journey of transformation. This shift in perspective can be incredibly liberating. It frees us from the need to prove or disprove these events historically. The question is no longer, did this happen exactly as written, but rather, what does this mean for me right now? It invites us to engage with these stories actively, to find our own lives reflected in their ancient pages. It turns reading from a passive act into a dynamic, interactive process of self-discovery. Think about the concept of resurrection. Literally, it's about coming back from the dead, an event that defies our understanding of biology. But symbolically, resurrection happens to us all the time. It's the recovery from a devastating loss. It's the moment we rise from the ashes of failure, stronger and wiser than before. It's the rebirth of hope after a period of despair. Every time we overcome a part of ourselves that was holding us back, be it an old habit, a limiting belief, or a past trauma, we are experiencing a form of resurrection. The tomb is not a physical place, but a state of consciousness, a psychological prison we break free from. The story isn't just about one person long ago. It's a promise of renewal that is available to all of us. So, the next time you encounter an ancient story that seems unbelievable or far-fetched, I invite you to pause. Instead of dismissing it, ask yourself, what could this symbolize? What if the flood isn't just a historical deluge, but represents a period of emotional chaos that cleanses the old to make way for the new? What if the forbidden fruit isn't just an apple, but a symbol for the kind of knowledge that brings both power and pain, a metaphor for our own coming of age? By embracing the symbolic, we don't lose the magic of these stories. We find it in a much deeper, more personal way. The magic isn't out there in some distant past. It's in here, in the human heart, in our capacity for growth, change, and transformation. These ancient narratives are not just stories we read. They are stories we live. They are a timeless gift from our ancestors, reminding us that the greatest miracles are the ones that happen within. Thank you so much for watching and exploring these ideas with me. If this resonated with you, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear which ancient stories hold the most symbolic meaning for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more journeys into the heart of wisdom. See you next time. They teach attentiveness, social cohesion, humility, and moral insight. The C parts, when observation aligns with opportunity. Food multiplies when generosity is initiated. Healing occurs when dignity is restored and care is applied. These principles resonate across time and culture, and they remain meaningful even when the literal events are questioned. The power of these stories lies in their ability to shape perception and behavior, to train the mind in reflection, patience, and moral awareness, rather than simply demanding blind belief. Even the quietest details in these stories carry profound meaning when we slow down enough to notice. Consider the simple act of walking through a forest or along a riverbank in ancient times. Every sound, every shift in light, every rustle of wind and leaf was significant. The stories of miracles often mirror this careful observation: the timing of an action, the sequence of events, the way one moment naturally flows into another. Ancient listeners would have felt this resonance deeply. The sea parted not as a spectacle to all, but as a reflection of their own attentiveness and their ability to align with natural forces. Each miracle was a mirror for human behavior, an invitation to recognize the subtle patterns in life that so often go unnoticed. Listening to these stories in the modern world in a slow, meditative way, we can begin to feel this resonance again, as if the narratives are slowly tuning our perception to the rhythms that our ancestors naturally understood. Miracles involving food, too, speak volumes about the social and psychological fabric of ancient communities. Multiplying loaves and fish is not just about abundance. It is about the way communities function, the subtle mechanics of generosity, and the power of shared responsibility. When one person shares, the entire group benefits. When scarcity is met with fear or hoarding, the community suffers. Ancient storytellers knew that these lessons would embed themselves more effectively in story than in direct instruction, because human beings remember patterns and consequences far better than abstract advice. By experiencing the narrative slowly, visualizing each action, each choice, and each response, the listener internalizes the lesson in a way that transcends words and facts. It settles beneath conscious thought, weaving itself into understanding without needing to shout. Even objects like iron, or events that seem small and mundane, carry their own layers of symbolic depth. Iron floating on water is not a magical event in itself. It represents restoration, attention, and shared vigilance. The community notices what is lost, takes action, and rectifies the situation. The miracle is in this alignment of observation, responsibility, and human initiative. This principle repeats across many stories. Miracles are not displays of impossibility, but frameworks for attention. They teach us where to look, when to act, and how to respond to situations that would otherwise pass unnoticed. Listening slowly, reflecting quietly, these lessons reveal themselves almost effortlessly, like the slow accumulation of warmth over a cold night. Even the grandest miracles, like resurrection or healing, operate in the same principle. To be blind, paralyzed, or possessed is not merely a physical state in these narratives. It is a reflection of social exclusion, psychological struggle, or inner chaos. Healing is not simply the restoration of a body, but of agency, dignity, and belonging. Resurrection is not only the return of life, but the reintegration of someone who has been lost, forgotten, or excluded. The ancient audience recognized these layers intuitively. They saw that miracles were tools for social cohesion, moral development, and self-awareness, rather than simple demonstrations of power. In the modern world, stripped of context, these stories can feel fantastical or impossible. Yet when absorbed in a slow, reflective listening style, their wisdom becomes palpable and emotionally resonant, embedding itself naturally in the mind. Perhaps the most striking aspect of these stories is their open-endedness. Ancient narrators rarely explain miracles fully, rarely provide clear instructions, and rarely demand belief. This was deliberate. By leaving space for interpretation, they allowed listeners to participate actively in meaning-making, to wrestle with the story, to imagine, and to internalize lessons in ways uniquely suited to each person. Literalism, by contrast, closes this space, replacing reflective engagement with rigid understanding, and in doing so, diminishes the narrative's power. The magic of these stories is not in their impossibility, but in their subtlety, their capacity to engage the mind without forcing it, to guide attention without controlling thought, to awaken curiosity without imposing certainty. Over centuries, the shift toward literalism hardened, and authority replaced insight. Questioning became dangerous. Curiosity was reframed as doubt, and the subtlety of the original narratives was obscured. Modern listeners often feel tension or disbelief when encountering these stories because they have been taught to expect the impossible rather than to notice the lessons embedded in observation and reflection. Children sense this naturally. They resist being forced into belief without understanding. They notice when meaning is flattened, and they intuitively grasp the subtle moral and psychological lessons that adults may have long forgotten. Ancient storytelling honored this resistance. It was part of the learning process, part of a slow unfolding of understanding that deepened with repeated listening and reflection over a lifetime. And so, as we move through the stories of the sea and the sun, of talking animals, multiplying food, floating iron, healing, resurrection, we begin to see a pattern emerge. These narratives are not about power in the conventional sense. They are not about proving the impossible. They are about alignment, awareness, responsibility, observation, and the ways in which human beings interact with each other, their environment, and the deeper rhythms of existence. They teach attentiveness, patience, humility, and moral insight, often without the listener consciously realizing it. Absorbed slowly in a reflective or sleep-inducing state, they lodge themselves in memory and perception, shaping understanding in ways that are subtle yet profound, immediate yet enduring. And here lies the true miracle, not in the events themselves, but in the capacity of stories to shape thought, behavior, and awareness. They train the mind, not the senses. They awaken reflection, not fear. They cultivate wisdom, not blind belief. Each story, each detail, each layer is an invitation to notice, to consider, to internalize. Listening carefully, imagining vividly, pondering quietly, we participate in the same process that ancient listeners did. We begin to inhabit the rhythm of the stories, and in doing so, we reclaim a kind of awareness that modern literalism often obscures. Let's journey deeper into the rhythm of these ancient narratives, to the miracles of sustenance and survival, where the ordinary transforms into the extraordinary. Consider Manna from the Sky, a story that has captivated imaginations for millennia. We often focus on the spectacle, the impossibility of bread appearing from nothing. But for ancient listeners, the miracle wasn't just the materialization. It was the lesson in scarcity, attentiveness, and gratitude. Each morning, the people were reminded that sustenance wasn't guaranteed. Provision required careful observation, mindful gathering, and a communal approach to sharing. The story encouraged reliance not on abundance alone, but on vigilance, cooperation, and ethical behavior. The real miracle was a teaching of rhythm, timing, and responsibility. Then there's the story of water turning into wine. To modern eyes, it's a magical act. But in its original context, it speaks to transformation and human celebration. Wine was a symbol of joy and shared experience. By turning the ordinary into the extraordinary, the narrative invites reflection on how our own small actions and attentiveness can produce remarkable outcomes. It's less about the liquid and more about the principle it conveys: awareness, and harmonizing our efforts with opportunity. Healing miracles, particularly those involving blindness or physical affliction, reveal an equally profound depth. In the language of these stories, blindness often represented social invisibility or inner uncertainty. Healing restored sight, yes, but more than that, it restored inclusion, agency, and dignity. Paralysis symbolized stagnation, the inability to participate fully in life's flow. So when the narratives describe limbs moving again, the miracle is not just physical restoration, but a lesson on the importance of community, care, and engagement. The underlying message is that action matters, that care matters, and that awareness combined with responsibility produces transformation. Walking on water is another powerful example. Seen literally, it defies all physical law. But symbolically, it represents the ability to move with awareness amidst uncertainty, to navigate life's turbulence with balance and attention. The disciples fear the unstable waves. The calm achieved through perception and trust all of these are teaching moments. The story is about aligning our actions with circumstances, about understanding rhythm and timing, about perceiving patterns that aren't immediately obvious, It teaches the power of balance and careful observation. Even the so-called absurd miracles, like a speaking donkey or the multiplication of food, carry profound lessons. The donkey sees danger and communicates it, reminding us that insight often comes from unexpected sources, from quiet observation, or from those we might dismiss. Sharing food teaches us about trust, cooperation, and the subtle dynamics of human society. These stories embed themselves in the mind as guiding principles, teaching moral attention and foresight, shaping our behavior subtly over time. They engage us without forcing belief, allowing curiosity and reflection to unfold naturally. Consider the healing of lepers. Lepers were not only physically afflicted, they were socially marginalized, forced to live on the outskirts, removed from community life. Healing in this context was an act of restoration to dignity and social inclusion. It's a powerful teaching of compassion, empathy, and responsibility. The miracle, whether literal or symbolic, demonstrates the transformative power of care, attention, and ethical action. It's an invitation to observe, understand, and act in alignment with our shared humanity. And then there is the story of raising the dead, which perhaps challenges belief more than any other. Literal interpretations can leave the modern mind skeptical. But in its original context, resurrection represents the restoration of agency, the reintegration of the excluded, and the affirmation of human dignity. Life isn't simply returned. The restored individual regains their place, purpose, and community. Ancient listeners would have felt the deep social and moral implications. When we reflect on it quietly, the story becomes a meditation on presence, attention, and restoration. It teaches that human compassion and ethical engagement are themselves miraculous in their capacity to restore life in subtle yet meaningful ways. All these miracles of provision, healing, and restoration carry another layer of meaning. They teach patience. No story is rushed. The lessons unfold gradually. Each detail, the timing, the community's response. The careful observation of circumstances is part of a rhythm designed to cultivate attentiveness. Ancient listeners were encouraged to return to these stories, to ponder them, to notice subtleties missed on a first hearing. By experiencing these narratives slowly, with space for reflection, we internalize not only the moral lessons, but also the very method of attentive engagement. This slow absorption trains the mind to notice patterns, engage with complexity, and appreciate subtlety. And so it becomes clear that these miracles, in their original context, were never intended to convince skeptics with spectacle. They were invitations to attention, frameworks for reflection, and tools for cultivating awareness. They operate on psychological, social, and symbolic levels that the literal mind often overlooks. To absorb them fully requires us to slow down, notice patterns, reflect, and internalize their lessons gradually. The miracle isn't just in the extraordinary event itself, but in the transformation it fosters in our perception, our attention, and our understanding. It's a journey into a deeper way of seeing the world and our place within it. Thanks for joining me on this reflection. If these ideas resonated with you, consider subscribing for more content that explores the deeper meanings behind our world's greatest stories. See you next time. The story of Jonah and the great fish is another miracle that often sparks incredulity in modern listeners. Yet when we slow down and immerse ourselves, it reveals layers of meaning far beyond the literal. Ancient audiences would have understood the narrative as a meditation on timing, self-awareness, and the consequences of avoiding responsibility. Jonah's time inside the fish was not merely a physical trial. It symbolized a period of reflection, introspection, and transformation. The fish itself, a creature of depth and mystery, represents the forces of nature and life that hold us when we fail to navigate responsibly. Being swallowed was not punishment in the moralistic sense, but a pause, an enforced stillness, allowing the mind and spirit to recalibrate. As we listen slowly, in a reflective, meditative state, we can feel this pause, this slow unfolding of awareness, as if the story is gently guiding us to consider how we, too, respond to the currents of our lives, and how avoidance or arrogance can lead to stagnation until we learn to align with rhythm and responsibility. Similarly, the story of Elijah calling down fire upon the altar carries subtler lessons than the dramatic spectacle suggests. Fire in the ancient world was not just a destructive force, it was the embodiment of attention, energy, and purification. The story is carefully constructed to teach discernment. The alignment of intention, observation, and moral clarity creates transformation. Ancient listeners understood that the miracle was not the sudden ignition itself, but the result of preparation, tool, and focus. The narrative unfolds slowly, deliberately, allowing the audience to absorb the interplay of action and consequence. In a modern, literalist reading, it becomes a story of impossible display. In immersive reflection, it becomes a lesson in the dynamics of attention, intention, and the subtle forces that shape human outcomes. And then there is the calming of the storm, one of the most widely recounted miracles in Christian scripture. A violent sea, a ship buffeted by waves. The disciples panicked. These are images that translate immediately into tension and anxiety. But the story is not about the suspension of natural law. It is about perception, trust, and alignment with deeper forces. Ancient listeners would have sensed that the power lay not solely in the one who calms the storm, but in the recognition of order within chaos. The understanding that fear and inattention exacerbate danger, and that composure, insight, and deliberate action restore balance. When absorbed slowly, the narrative becomes almost a meditation, allowing the listener to imagine themselves in the midst of chaos, to feel the waves and wind, and to understand the inner calm and attentiveness required to navigate turbulence both in the physical world and within the mind. The feeding of the 5,000, or its parallel accounts, is another story that rewards slow, reflective listening. The gathering of a multitude, the division of scarce resources, and the surprising satisfaction of hunger speaks to the psychological, social, and moral structures embedded in community life. Ancient audiences would have recognized the subtleties. Sharing creates abundance. Fear and hoarding create scarcity, and the attentiveness of individuals to the needs of others shapes collective outcomes. Absorbed in a sleep documentary style, the listener can visualize each person receiving sustenance, feel the unfolding cooperation, and perceive the patterns of trust and interdependence that make the miracle not merely possible, but inevitable in its context. The narrative trains the mind to notice consequences, the dynamics of social action, and the subtle ways in which ethical choices ripple outward. Walking on water, returning to its quiet symbolic power, is best understood as a meditation on perception and courage. The waves are not obstacles to be conquered by supernatural strength. They are challenges to attentiveness and adaptability. The one who walks must perceive rhythm, trust, insight, and act in alignment with circumstance. Fear, doubt, and panic disrupt this flow, while calm, focused observation allows navigation across uncertainty. In this, the miracle functions as both metaphor and practice. It invites the listener to reflect on the ways in which life, as turbulence, can be approached, understood, and traversed without succumbing to chaos. When experienced in a slow, reflective narration, the story becomes not a puzzle of disbelief but a guide to mindful engagement with the rhythms and uncertainties of existence. Levitical cleansing rituals and healings of the afflicted carry layers of moral, social, and psychological resonance. Lepers, those isolated by disease and social stigma, are healed not just physically, but reintegrated into community life. The miracle teaches attentiveness to social cohesion, ethical engagement, and the restoration of dignity. Blindness, paralysis, and the expulsion of demons are also symbolic. They describe exclusion, stagnation, and internal chaos. Healing restores agency, not merely the body. The subtlety here is remarkable. These stories do not demand passive belief, but invite the listener to witness transformation, to perceive patterns, and to internalize lessons about responsibility, attention, and empathy. Slowly absorbed, these narratives cultivate moral awareness and sensitivity, shaping perception even when no literal intervention occurs. Even seemingly small miracles, like Elijah's provision of oil to a widow, or the multiplication of small quantities to meet community need, reflect a profound understanding of human psychology and social dynamics. Scarcity, in these stories, becomes a teaching tool. The narrative guides listeners to notice patterns, to recognize the consequences of selfishness versus generosity, and to perceive the ways in which small acts can ripple outward, producing abundance and cohesion. The miracle is subtle, almost imperceptible if rushed, yet entirely present when absorbed with patience. It reminds the listener that insight, action, and ethical alignment are themselves miraculous when they produce positive transformation within complex systems of human interaction. And as we trace these patterns, it becomes evident that miracles, in their original context, were not about spectacle or literal impossibility, but about cultivating awareness, attention, and ethical engagement. Each story, whether it involves water, fire, bread, sight, or restoration, teaches reflection, patience, and alignment with the deeper rhythms of life. Ancient listeners were trained to absorb meaning gradually over repeated exposure, in a rhythm of contemplation and repetition that strengthened memory, insight, and moral discernment. Listening slowly, imagining vividly, pondering quietly, we can access the same patterns, allowing the narratives to lodge themselves deeply within our perception, shaping thought and understanding in ways that literalism alone cannot achieve. Even the seemingly fantastical elements, the talking animals, the sudden abundance, the miraculous healings gain profound significance when experienced reflectively. They are tools to engage the mind, not blunt instruments of belief. They are invitations to notice, to ponder, and to internalize. Each narrative contains a rhythm, a timing, and a subtle alignment of human action with consequence. This is the essence of miracle in ancient storytelling, a guide for living attentively, ethically, and reflectively, encoded in stories that appear at first glance as impossible. Absorbed in the meditative, sleep-oriented way we are experiencing them now, these lessons become almost subconscious, embedding themselves gently yet firmly in awareness, shaping perception and understanding over time. And so, as we drift deeper into the patterns of these ancient tales, it becomes clear that the greatest miracle is not in the events themselves, but in the awakening of thought, the cultivation of attention, and the subtle transformation of perception. Miracles are invitations to notice, to act responsibly, and to participate consciously in the unfolding rhythms of life. They are exercises in patience, observation, and reflection, delivered across millennia through stories that engage the mind, body, and imagination. In the stillness of this moment, as we listen, imagine, and reflect, we participate in the same process that ancient audiences did, feeling the depth, subtlety, and wisdom of narratives carefully designed to shape consciousness, nurture curiosity, and cultivate awareness.